Hey, 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 what's up, Crown Nation? Welcome to Rock the Crown. It's me, your girl, Naima, with my queens, Nefertari and Nafisa. And today we have our special guest and expert, Hadia. Because as we stated last week, we are going to be talking about the body keeps the score. Last week, talked about mental health and wellness. The week before, we also continued to talk about mental health and wellness in another way, talking about the frog syndrome and the frog story. And again, reminding everyone, this is the last episode where we're talking about mental health, and this mental health month ends May 30th. So we want to encourage you all, 30th, 31st, yeah, one of those, 31st. So we want to encourage you all to make sure that you're doing something for your own personal mental health. And because this topic is so sensitive, Hadia has a couple of tips that she wants to give us before we actually start this full episode. Hadia?
Absolutely. So, when we're talking about anything regarding health and wellness, you want to bring yourself into a mind state where you're keeping your body calm, centering yourself, centering your mind, centering your emotions. If you have a second before we get started, I encourage everyone to go grab some water, glass of water, keep it by you as we talk and discuss. And and we come back, sit back down, take a couple of deep big breaths all the way to your belly. Fill it up. Blow it out at least 3 times. Center your mind and center yourself to talk about some really deep ways to heal some very serious topics that is necessary. And we're all here together, so we are supporting each other.
Alhamdulillah. Okay, so again, this is also our last book of our book series. So this season we had 3 books that we talked about. We talked about You Could Be the Happiest Woman in the World. We talked about We Should All Be Millionaires. And finalizing our book series this season is The Body Keeps the Score. So if you have not downloaded on Audible that specific book, you can go do that. If you have Amazon Prime, hopefully, if you're buying things like we all know we are, you should have some credits. But if not, you can always purchase it on Audible and various other platforms that have this book. But again, very, very important that everyone knows that this book is an extremely serious topic, and it does require a lot of processing. It is 16 hours, but I know that some people may not be able to actually process it through. So if you find yourself in a crisis as you're reading the book or even during this episode, always feel free to reach out to a mental health counselor and or therapist. And you can also reach out to Hadia of Jenna Holistic Health. And last week we put her website on there, which is Jenna Holistic health.com, right?
So right now my website's under construction, so you can just
Okay.
search me on Facebook or Instagram and connect with me straight through there.
Okay, alhamdulillah. All right, so let's get to it. So,
You ready?
I'm ready.
Are we ready? Are we
I'm ready, but I'm not.
We're ready. We can do this.
Ready, we ready, but we not, right?
We're ready. We got it.
All right, so we're going to start off with so the first aspect of this book, it just kind of talks about, well, the body keeps the score. Let's just kind of talk about that. This is the brain, mind, and body in the healing of trauma. This is a book that, of course, connects all of those elements. And this is important in terms of like, although we can go through counseling and things like that, but there are triggers that we'll eventually talk about later where we know that you can go to the experts and talk about counseling and talk about therapy, but you could literally be on a train or on a bus or in your house and smell something or see something or hear something, or someone touches you a specific way, and you can be basically put back into a very traumatic episode based on your physical, mental, and emotional trauma that you've experienced over time. And so this book kind of basically talks about all of those different things. And then the beginning of the book talks about, of course, Vietnam veterans and their story, but it also talks about medication that happens with patients. And so, Hadia, can you kind of talk about, where basically it's talking about, hey, the antidepressants really messed up the mental health field. And if you wanted to kind of elaborate on that aspect of it, what do they mean by that?
Sure. Gosh, this is such a high debated topic within the field. The use of medication to, quotes, heal and medicate, and there's opinions and then there's facts. So let's deal with the facts first. The author was really talking about how when we discovered that there's a way to manage the symptoms of mental health disorders through medication, it was all the craze, because there are such disorders that are very severe to the point where it's debilitating. And simply going to counseling, while it does help, you need something else to balance out the physical symptoms that can result from a mental disorder. And so you can imagine when we're introduced to something new, we have a tendency to take it overboard. And it was no different when antidepressants were introduced into the field. Everything got a pill. As we can see in most of the health field now, everything gets a pill. And so we were over prescribing medication to people for the smallest things, which creates, and this was an Advil. These were very strong medications. And so a lot of that created a lot of dependency, and which just created a whole nother problem for us. And what happened was the overuse of the medications led us to treat mental illness like it was a disease, like it was not something you can recover from. It's just is what it is. Just here's your pill for the rest of your life. And that's just your life now. And it just took away, I think, the human ability to naturally heal yourself. We are equipped with the faculties to heal ourselves with a little support, with a little help, yes, but we got a little carried away. And so you see that a lot now in the field, and how people respond to mental illness or mental health is very, oh, you take pills, something's wrong with you. That's where a lot of that response came from. You're sick, and it's not like that.
So when you talk about that there are ways that we can be able to benefit and change without having an excessive amount of medication, what are some of those things? I know you kind of talked about, even before the show, breathing, but even with something like that throughout, your regular daily routine.
Sure.
What are some of those?
So there's levels to it. When someone is in, this book talks a lot about trauma, and the thing about trauma is it sends your body completely off balance. Everything is off. Your whatever, very, developed or high functioning self that you think you are goes out the window. You become, those animalistic responses kick in. And so that's what we call in the field, you're in crisis mode. Everything is a crisis. The fire is blazing. It's hot everywhere. Everything's a panic. And so medication comes in when you're in that state. And so there's levels to medication. There's natural medication. There's things like teas and certain herbs that you can use that have a very strong potency that is quite effective if you have the proper person who's knowledgeable to give it to you. The same thing goes when it comes to if you increase the levels. So under that, you might have things like breathing or take a walk or take a sip of water or go take a nap. But you won't do that if you're in crisis mode, right? So you're not going to go take a nap. You might find something much more extreme. And so as you go up on these levels, that is a scale. So you might need that high medication. And then once you've regulated, once your body has gotten back to equilibrium, you step down to the next thing. You maybe go to something more natural, something that's not as invasive to the body as these strong medications. Then you go under that and say, wow, I only need chamomile now. I'm good. You see, so it's levels to it. And ideally we want to get to a place where, you know, we need as little alteration as possible, which is not easy for anyone.
All right. So would you say too that providing like words and language, you know, that being something that's critical for, you know, it kind of goes back when we talked about even mindset. Sometimes we may not be able to say these certain things to ourselves, but having someone there to be able to just give you that boost with language and words and comfort affirmations of whatever to kind of help you get through certain things.
Oh yes, languaging is huge. Languaging affects your mindset. And last week we were just kind of touching on how if you have a mentality that you're sick, you will be sick. Your body is registering those words as thoughts, as a belief, and your body will respond to it as such. So that's why another movement that happened, another shift that happened in the field was moving from an illness approach to a wellness approach. So when you go and you talk to your doctor and you talk to your counselor, they should be speaking hope into you. They shouldn't be telling you, oh, you're going to have to take this forever. It's the languaging. We're going to do this for right now. We'll see how you respond and we'll adjust as necessary. That just sounds so much different. And your body is going to take that the same way you're going to take a medicine. It's medicine also. It's also
Yeah, that's very interesting too. And I know you all mentioned a lot about trauma, and they talked about this in the book. But could you give us maybe just like I guess a brief insight into not only maybe the definition of trauma, but how the understanding of trauma has evolved? You know.
Yes, absolutely. So trauma is defined as any incident that creates a large enough impact on your life that it causes difficulties for you to get through your day. You're having physical symptoms like flashbacks, nervous responses when you hear things or smell things, somatic responses is what they're called. Anything that has an impact to the point where it changes your body chemistry, your mental thinking, emotional responses, your physical, anything that leaves a pretty broad scope of what trauma can be, right? A lot of people think of it as a major event, a catastrophic event, and it is. But trauma is different for every individual. A car accident for someone could be extremely traumatic, but maybe not so much for someone else. So trauma is very personal, perceptive, and how the person responds to it.
Yeah, and I think you said a key thing too, that I think is a key distinction, that trauma really relates to the response, not necessarily the event.
That's right.
Because two people can have the same event happen to them, but their response is what kind of determines whether it's going to be traumatic or not. I think that's a good distinction, because a lot of times people just assume that if you have the same event happen, you know, to everyone, that everybody's going to have the same response, even if it's something that may be that normally gives a traumatic response, that causes a person to act out of their normal, development, their normal understanding, their normal faculties, for example.
Exactly.
People, I think, a lot of times mix up the event as being traumatic, but it's really the response that's traumatic.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm being clear.
Absolutely, crystal clear. And that's exactly kind of the way we approach it now. It's more of how you respond to the event. It's all about how you respond to it, and everyone's going to respond differently.
And so, because we're talking about, okay, so we appreciate that understanding of trauma, because again, I think also people deny that they have had a traumatic event, either because of shame or, not feeling like, or feeling like I've gotten over this, but not really realizing that they're continuing to perpetuate a response from a traumatic event, whether it's through words, language, whatever, not really realizing that. So now we want to kind of talk about how trauma then seeps into and influences relationships, because again, these traumatic experiences, which people, this is post traumatic sense, PTSD. Yes,
yeah.
PTSD, right? That people really are living this out daily. And one of the things that I heard the gentleman speak about in the book was that people are living out PTSD daily and don't realize it, and then they wonder why they can't get better, because they continue to perpetuate the same pattern, and the body continues to respond to the same pattern, and then inevitably it becomes a habit. And so until you can break those, we talked about this last week, those neurons from that trauma, people's response is the same. So like you could be talking to somebody, and if I tell somebody like, yeah, girl, you don't look good in that green, well, the green may throw something, and it may throw them off, right? And so every time somebody says that, they have a hissy fit, but really it's a traumatic experience that they keep having. And then they keep saying that the other person is wrong because, no, I'm not doing this, you make me do this, right? Ooh, kind of talk about that. I know I'm probably talking too much, but talk about relationships, because this is something we have to be able to acknowledge for ourselves and help other people to acknowledge it. Like that keeps coming up for you.
Yeah, it's a loop. So a lot of times, and I think that's probably, to be honest, one of the most terrifying things about trauma is it keeps you in a loop. And if you think about having something terrible happen to you, and imagine being stuck in that terrible thing over and over and over again, and you're the only one stuck in it. It seems like you're the only one stuck in it. So many emotions can come from that. Isolation, fear, those are just to name a two, but those in itself are extremely heavy. And so for one thing, what's happening for this person who's stuck in this loop is that they are trying extremely hard to be normal. They're trying extremely hard to get out of it, or to will it away. If only it was that simple. But for them, that's, of course, you don't want to make that your reality, right? And so what happens is typically the root of the trauma gets buried, it gets pushed to the side, shoved to the side. I'm fine, because you want to be fine. You want to be okay. You don't want this thing to have happened. You don't want it to continuously be happening, even though it is. It is. And that's the part that is very difficult for a lot of trauma survivors to come to terms with. It's the facing the demon, facing the monster in the closet that's still there. Just because you close the door, it only makes it seem as if it's gone away. And so when we have take those interactions of what's happening internally for this person, the awareness has been shut off for the sake of protection, for their own sanity. And so they're no longer connected to the root. All they know now, all they have now is reactions. Now they're just reacting. They're no longer in tune with why they're reacting. It's just pure reactivity. And so you see it manifest in relationships, in their behaviors, in their emotions. You can't hide it, unfortunately. It's going to show itself because trauma, when it happens, it hits us, and the impact of the trauma, that energy transfer from that experience into our bodies cellularly sticks. It sticks to us, and it's going to come out at some point in time. And it's not easy. It's really not easy. It's not a light thing, to expect someone to just come to terms with something they've been through. It's hard. It's extremely hard, very hard. So lots of mercy is needed.
Right. When you were talking about the cellular level, this kind of reminds me of like our traumatic experience as African Americans here in America, being slaves and things like that. And when people are like, oh, just kind of get over it. It was 400 years ago. It's like, no, this is at a DNA level. It keeps happening at a DNA level. So yeah, the response. So it kind of also makes you think about like how women respond more regularly. And instead of it saying, well, that's how women are, but it's actually may be a protective response that we have basically all created from our traumatic experience in slavery, dealing with the slave master and whatever relationship he tried to have with us or whatever. And then how men respond regularly, which can be seen as angry and whatever. It's actually a cellular level from when he was being beat and all these other things. It really kind of helps you to really reflect and take a second and say, now I can really be a little bit more empathetic to that person because I understand that they're not doing this because they're mean or, they're doing this from maybe a hurtful place. And so it kind of helps them to, it helps you to understand and settle your thoughts about specific people. Well, at least it does for me. So yeah. That's really, really powerful.
Yeah. Another beautiful thing about a lot of group therapy is wonderful for when you are able to get to that point of sharing, is the bonding, the collective healing that can happen when you recognize someone else's pain and someone else recognizes your pain. And so recently, I'm trying not to get try not to dig into my field too much and be too critical of my own folks. But recently we have brought into our practice the understanding of generational trauma quite recently, which is kind of like, really? We're just not recognizing that? But it's so real. So now neuroscience has all this wonderful research about how trauma alters the brain and it creates chemical imbalances. And, I'm like, okay, I'm glad we are all on the same page now. Alhamdulillah, that's great. That's wonderful. Now we can have these conversations backed by science. So that's good. And we can actually see these effects and how they really truly are passed from generation to generation. The beautiful thing about these connections, even though they are trauma bonds, is that they're also healing bonds as well. They can be flipped into something useful, something that can be used to heal. A lot of times we feed on our trauma, especially as African Americans, we feed into our trauma. And it's almost like you're not letting the wound heal. You're not really letting it heal, and you're not taking the time to really let it heal. And so when you come together and recognize these trauma impacts on a cellular level, the collective energy helps to heal these cellular things. That's why it's even more important when you have such a humongous trauma like slavery, like a genocide. you must come together. That community is so necessary, that they come together and share and mourn and grieve together, which we've been doing for a long, long time. So we're doing the work, alhamdulillah, we are doing the work. And you can see that. You can see it in our communities as they start to grow and get better. You can see the healing taking place. So you got the grand scale trauma, and then you have personal, individual trauma. It's all connected.
Yeah, I know we were listening to the beginning of the book, and no, hold on, I wrote a whole bunch of stuff down. Honey. I was like, what? This is like a whole. I started like I'm in school, but I know that, and I know Neff, you were saying that you listened to the first 9 minutes, just like even the prologue of it. It's alive, right? And so, some of the beginning statistics in the book, it talks about 1 in 5 people have been molested. 1 in 4 people have been beaten by a parent and left a mark. 1 in 3 couples engage in physical violence with each other. 25% of the population has lived around alcoholic relatives, right? And everybody always talks about, we got that one relative that's alcoholic, one relative that's the drunk, one relative that's the, and then we also have 1 in 8 that have witnessed their mother being beaten or hit, right? These are major traumas that happen, period. Not just like African American community, it's period, right? And although we are resilient, these things stay with us. They carry on. And so when you start thinking about, man, all of this stuff is happening and we're not even seeking any like help for it. Like, yeah, you were 6 years old, you saw your mother get beat, and now you wonder why you don't trust men. It's like, it's a process, right? So we really have to go back through that. And from that, it talks about the new disciplines, which of course you're talking about the neuroscience, the development psychopathology, and the interpersonal neurobiology. I know you love all these terms, Hadia.
I do.
Those 3 new branches of science that have recently been developed really can make a great impact if we all go through the necessary steps.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and now you can get this stuff scanned. Like you can literally go and get a brain scan, and they can see how your brain is currently functioning, where you are, and with regards to any trauma you've experienced. So it's out there. Accessibility, and awareness of these things kind of puts certain communities on the end of the receiving, but it's definitely there and it's available. And the first step is to just ask about it. What's available for me?
Right. One thing I found that was interesting too in the book, when it starts talking about the cellular and the brain and relating it to mental health, and then it talked about the processing, the top-down processing and the bottom-up processing. I mean, I found that part to be very interesting because I'm very analytical, so that's kind of like the way I like to think about things. But can you talk a little bit more about that in terms of the brain and the processing, the top down and the bottom up approach?
Yeah, so I mean, it's really just about, I guess, about how you would approach the way you process. So some people, they want to start small, start with the details. They start with the content. Other people, they start at the top. So, you might be one of those people that can walk in and say, this is what happened to me. You're probably a top down person. Okay. You're starting with the big stuff, starting with a statement, and you kind of work your way to the details. What happened? How did it affect you? How's it affecting you now? You process going downward. And so from the bottom up, this is a person who, it's too much to bite off diving straight in. It's way too much. We don't recommend it. Everybody's gonna need a different approach to therapy. So for someone who is able to do a bottom-up approach, you start with just what's happening right now, just right now, and you work your way from there. And it's about just, it's like a starting point, really. And our brain has its own way of responding and processing all this information, all of the information that we've ever experienced. And it's a lot. We're talking about from our first encounter to the world. We're collecting information, collecting. And so depending on how impactful that information is, it will stick. And eventually you're gonna have to file those things away, clear those things out. And that's really how our brain processes. It's like it's filing things away. It's taking in information, putting it here, putting it there, deleting. I don't need that anymore. Sometimes it gets stuck, you start glitching. It's really it's really all of those things happening all the time. So sometimes you need assistance with processing all of this information. You need that. It really makes a huge difference. And that's why we always heavily recommend anyone who feels they've encountered trauma or been through something traumatic to seek therapy so that they can process and come out of that loop, work through that information, release that information, and they can continue moving forward without being stuck in that symptom response and those reactions.
Yeah, that kind of reminds me of like relationships, like after you've gone through a relationship, whatever the case, friendship, marriage, family. And once you get knowledge of this specific things, then you can kind of say, you know what, I could have handled that better. Because now that you know better, like when you know more, you can do more, right? And so as we, again, mentioned therapy, making sure that therapy takes that place, and then the top down and the bottom up, a mental approach, processing and things like that, making sure that that we have the ability to process through that through different tools. We want to talk really quickly about the tools that people can use to strengthen those techniques.
Yes. Again, if you feel you've experienced trauma, it's not recommended you try to work through them alone. There's support groups, your community. You can find someone that has possibly experienced something similar, somewhere safe where you can process this. What a lot of times what can happen is when you try to process a trauma experience, it can throw you into crisis. And you are reliving that experience depending on the severity. And you don't want to be alone when that's happening. You want to come back to the present and be able to regulate all of those things. It's very important. So when you're wanting to process trauma, depending on its severity will depend on where you start. Unfortunately, there's no super neat package that you can just put on how I can work through this. It's really about thinking about where you are in your process. And you can ask yourself, can I do this by myself? And I don't recommend anyone do much of anything by themselves. It just helps to have someone when it comes to the struggles and the difficulties of life. So, I call someone when my favorite Netflix show ends and, I want to talk about that. So anything, seek support surrounding whatever has happened. It's so much power in your narrative, so much power in your voice. And a lot of people have fear, they're scared about, how to express themselves, but you can. And so when you start to the journey, you find that safe space and you find that support. A lot of the techniques that we use in my therapy practice is mindfulness, and that's doing a lot of recentering back into the body. We're talking about body keeps the score, and those memories are stored in our bodies. You can find those points of tension in your body, and you can trace them back to when it started and what happened, and it will trigger memories, and you can use your senses and to help trigger we talked about smelling something. In a therapy session, you can have someone bring in a scent and work your way into the memory, all to get to the end goal of processing those memories. It's almost like digestion.
Mm-hmm.
You got a blockage of this memory, it's blocking you, can't move on. Go back to it, break it down into pieces, remind yourself of it, go into it, and then come back out of it. Yeah. So that's one really good way. There's a lot of different ways. There's a lot of different symptoms. Dissociation happens a lot for people who are experienced trauma. There's just so many things that you can do. It's we would be here for a while, but there's a lot. Yeah.
Earlier you were talking about the brain scanning, and I was just wondering about the body and the stress hormones. And sometimes even when we don't realize that our body is under a certain type of stress, our body is stressed and working on it, but we don't realize that. So I was just wanting you to speak to that a little bit, like how.
Yeah, our bodies are working overtime to compensate for what we missed in that moment. So it's almost like you're frozen in time. So you're frozen in that moment. Your body is stuck somewhere in that moment. And all the other parts of your body are overcompensating for that part that's stuck there. And so I was listening to an amazing podcast about somatic processing and somatic experiencing. And the way you do that is by pressing play on what you experienced. What did you miss out of that experience? What didn't you get? Maybe it was you didn't get a chance to run when you wanted to run, and it's finding a way to work that energy out of wherever it is being stored. Whatever you didn't get to do, it's completion. It's making that experience finished. And that breaks you out of that loop, like, okay, it's done now. It's been a very, very powerful technique that's been used a lot lately. It's called somatic experiencing. Really, really powerful stuff when it comes to releasing trauma from the physical body, because it truly is stored there. You'd be amazed at what our bodies hold when it comes to what we've experienced, both good and bad. So yeah, a lot of that is when our brain responds, our body is responding, and releasing that can be huge when it comes to healing trauma.
I think we're all kind of sitting here like, what's happening? What about me? What about my little girl when I was 6 and I didn't get the sleeping bag? Right?
Goodness.
There's so many different things that you can kind of remember. And also, like, people are always remembering, like, man, one thing that I've learned recently about emotions is that people will continue to tell you the story that affected them most because of how they felt about it, right? So that's good and bad. So, like, you'll always hear people continue to tell the same story. You never hear them tell a different side of that same story. They just say the same story over and over, because that is what made the impact, both good and bad. And that's where, on the bad side, that's where the trauma lies. So when you're going through childhood memories, when you're going through divorce, when you're going through relationships with friends and things that, or whatever ended, the trauma is in the way you tell the story. And so when you now are talking about the symptomatic approach, going back to, okay, let's talk about what didn't you say when you wanted to say what you needed to say, or when you wanted to scream when you thought the boogeyman was in the closet and he wasn't, right? All of those different things. Yeah, it just makes so much sense to me. Like,
it is. Right, it's very practical. Very practical. And not just saying powerful. But scream.
Yeah.
You say, oh, I really wanted to kick him. me as a therapist, me and my client, we're going to go find something to kick.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And we're going to go back and use our imagination because our brains don't know the difference.
Mm-hmm.
Ironically, when we're retelling that story, they don't know that it's already happened.
Mm-hmm.
So go reenact it and reenact it out and finish your story and make it your ending. Make it your ending.
Yeah.
With a therapist, you guys, please don't try this at home. Okay?
That part.
This is serious stuff. All right.
Yes.
Yeah.
That part.
I thought it was interesting too in the book when he started talking about some different therapies, and particularly when he talked about dance, because I love the dance.
Yeah.
And movement, and then in particular yoga as being a very an effective method to try to treat trauma, because usually when you think about yoga or people talk about the benefits of yoga, they're usually talking about in terms of increasing your flexibility and that type of thing. So I thought it was interesting they talked about that. Can you talk maybe a little bit about treating trauma with those types of things like yoga, movement, dance, that type of stuff?
Yeah. So, let's see, how can we kind of package this so it's not a whole lecture? Essentially, what the body is doing, the brain is going to do. So movement is moving those muscles, pushing that blood, working those lungs, which is sending nutrients, nourishment to your brain. Your brain is going to take those nutrients and nourishment, and it's going to start repairing itself. It's going to start healing itself. Those parts of the brain that's misfiring or stuck in that loop, it's going to just come on out of it. And so yoga, as has been practiced for a very, very long time, is a wonderful way of regulating the flow of energy in your body. If you're moving like this, your blood's going to be moving like this. Your energy is going to be moving like this. But if you're moving like this, it's a whole different thing. Your brain has to do something different, even down to your voice response, the level of your tone, how loud you're talking or how soft you talk, the speed of how you're talking. All of this is accompanies mindfulness and just being aware of the Western idea of mindfulness is being aware of the present right now. How am I moving? How am I talking? How is my mannerisms? Am I sitting up straight? All of this helps bring awareness to the body, and it helps us identify those parts of our body that needs attention. Movement is crucial to our health. And when people think of movement, they always, I don't want to exercise. And that's just because the true enjoyment of moving our body has been kind of taken away, and it's been made this something cosmetic. I need to work on my body. That's fine if that's your goal, but truly using exercise and movement for healing and health is as simple as taking a walk, is as simple as stretching your arms back, letting the blood flow through your shoulders, through your neck, up into that backside of your brain that houses your movement, all the way up into the front part that houses your personality and the way we talk and the way we think. It's all about circulations. It's all about the flow of your energy, the flow of your blood and your breath. So using movement is a dynamic tool. Highly, highly recommended. I use it all the time in my personal practice and always with my clients, especially with individuals that have suffered from any type of trauma. We shake it out. We shake it out, we move it out, dance it out, all of the things. And everyone is going to need a different type of movement as well. So again, it's all medicine.
Right. One thing that reminds me of, I was actually having a conversation with someone that called the masjid today, but talking about yoga, right? And when you were just talking about the back of the head, the forehead, and all these things, it's also so similar to the Muslim prayer. And like, man, you can get rid of some trauma praying 5 times a day, right? Just
You
because of the movement.
can.
And
You
so what
can.
I've noticed is that, and this is no slight to anyone that can't move in that way, but a lot of people, when they start getting older, they sit in the chair. And really, movement, the body is meant to move. And even though we have aches and pains like that, people forget that when you process through those aches and pains, you won't have those any longer. But if you continue to, okay, it hurts, I'm not going to move it anymore, it just gets more stiff and more, and then you can't move. So really, it's such a beautiful thing to be able to say, you know what, I'm going to continue to pray. I'm going to move my body, like putting your arms like this and holding your, like in ruku, and then coming back up and then going all the way to, it's like, that's a whole vinyasa in yoga, right?
It is.
So when I started
is.
yoga, like about 8 months ago, I was like, I'm praying right now.
That just makes a lot. Yes, you did.
Yes, but I can tell, and I haven't really been practicing yoga since I moved as often, right? I'm missing a couple of days because the schedule moved. But I'm like, man, I gotta get back to yoga because again, how much and how free I was in terms of like not being as stressed. So I run to, kind of release my stress, but yoga was a whole nother thing. And shout out to my yoga instructor, Nasira, yoga infinitum. But anyway, so yeah, that whole situation kind of changed my whole body and how it was beginning to feel. And I wasn't feeling tight and tense. But now I know, because I'm not doing it 3 times a week, it's a total difference. And I'm like, and I've been telling you, I was like, yeah, girl, I did 2 classes last week, but but I need to really get back to that. So yeah, definitely thinking about yoga and prayer and how blessed by Allah we are that He even created the technique. And we don't even realize how we already have things within our lives as Muslims that combat the trauma. Not to say, let me back that up really quick. That does not mean because you pray 5 times a day, you don't need a counselor.
That is true. That is true. But it is definitely good practice.
Right. But alhamdulillah.
Yes, use both. Use both. Okay. Yes, but it's definitely a reason that it says prayer is for you. And if you knew the benefit of it, you would do it often. You would run to your prayer mat. And that is one of the reasons why, one of the many reasons, but the physical movements, elongating that spine, being able to move those joints, the blood flow. It's a beautiful thing. Even in recitation, being able to take those breaths, to recite, all of that is using your lungs. It's incredible. And we're late. We just now, science is late, honestly.
Okay. And listening to recitation, how melodic the recitation is, and how even people who are not Muslim, don't know Arabic, when they listen to the recitation, they go into a Zen zone as well. It's just like everybody's like, ooh, what is this, right? That recitation, honey, I need to listen to some recitation tonight, okay?
That's right.
Not just during Ramadan. We need to be listening to the recitation on a regular basis. Okay, alhamdulillah. Now we want to go into early trauma changes neural anatomy. Just kind of speak over that really, really quick. I know we're almost down to the last hour, but we definitely want to make sure that we get these 3 last points in before we go off.
Yeah, and it's funny that this is one thing that's coming up. I was thinking about how when we were talking about how trauma is different for everybody, I was thinking about the way children are very often dismissed. It's not that big of a deal. You'll be all right. It's okay. Just because we forgot how traumatic it was for someone to talk about us at school. They are experiencing that as trauma. And so what that teaches you is that, what you're experiencing is not true. You don't trust your body. Don't trust the emotion that you're experiencing from it. No, you're not scared. No, it's not a big deal. And so that becomes a narrative, and you start to learn very early on how to push away trauma, how to will it away. I'm okay it away. And beautifully, wonderfully, our brains are so resistant that eventually we will be able to heal it more naturally, right? And it won't be a big deal. But after a while, especially when we're young, it can be long-term effects. That's why most people, when they come see me, they're talking about something that happened 20 years ago.
Right.
Because it was stuck with them so much. And we don't, as parents, you don't know what that thing might be. You have no idea. And so it's important to just do your best to stay in touch with them, in touch with children at a younger age, because those neurons and our ability to imitate is happening from infancy. We're imitating sadness. We're imitating laughing. We're imitating fear. We don't even know why we're scared. I'm scared too now. Now the child is also scared. So even from the womb, even from when the mother is feeling those feelings, the child also has those impacts as well. And from then on, we're already collecting that data. We're already collecting all that information. Most of the things that occur in adulthood have roots from our childhood. And it's mostly about the responses that we have, not the events. The events are going to happen for the rest of our life. It's all about how we are responding to them. So if you're wondering, why am I this way? Take a couple years back and you might find the answer.
All right. So next we so we talked about traumatic memories and how they're disorganized, but now we want to we talked about restoring the balance between emotional and rational brain, all of the different activities that we need to basically have. And if for those people who, if this is kind of going a little bit too quickly, you can always, again, get the audio book. I recommend that you go through it with a therapist, because again, some of this can be extremely traumatic. And as you stated earlier, it can really send you down a spiral. Even though you're reading something, you're thinking that, oh, I'm going to do this on my own. Because that's really what people want to do. They want to do it on their own because they're embarrassed about whatever the experience is. That's why it's a trauma. They're trying to cover it up and make sure that, oh, no, it didn't happen. It didn't happen. And so when you're reading about it and trying to uncover it, you actually sometimes will send yourself into a spiral, and you do need a therapist. So again, making sure that when you're reading these types of books that you do have someone on the side to help you. But the last thing is how to try to process traumatic experiences like our other experiences.
Yeah. So just really quickly, it's just really a traumatic memory usually has holes in it. We sometimes we don't remember it at all. In extreme cases, our brains have done a wonderful job in protecting us, even though our bodies are still responding. So when it comes to processing trauma, one of the keys to it is recalling what has happened. And narrative therapy is another way that's really impactful, along with using sensory to help our brains jog our memory. If we can't remember the memory, we won't be able to process it and digest it to release it. So it's important that we face that memory, bring it up out of the darkness, out of its depths, look at it, process it, and then digest it, break it down, and then we're able to let it go. So yeah, that's the key difference between a trauma experience and a normal experience, is that it usually has holes in it, and you want to be able to recall those memories.
And for some, dance the night away.
Absolutely. Dance it out. After this, y'all stand up, shake it out, go dance,
okay,
play some music.
We're going to a dance session, ladies and gentlemen.
Okay.
Because we
take
need
a break
right now.
Look, don't go into your therapy after we end this. This was your therapy. You did good today. This is your session.
Yes. Do we have any last words from anyone?
No, I was just like thinking this was really great. Hadia, we really appreciate you coming on for the second week in a row, giving your insight, sharing, just, I'm almost sure that we probably touched and helped a lot of people, and that's what we strive to do. And so we just appreciate you being here.
Oh, I'm so happy I could be here. Thank you all so much.
You're welcome.
And so we want to remind everyone that you can follow us on Facebook, subscribe to us on YouTube, and also follow us on Instagram. I don't know why I'm always thinking of what is the subscribe, what is follow, what is the Twitter, Instagram, all of that. You can do that with all of us.
And I just like the fact that she does it too. It's not just me.
Yes.
So Rock the Crown, and of course on Instagram it's Rock the Crown for us, the number 4, and then us if you want to follow us on Instagram, and of course always being able to subscribe to our YouTube channel in case you missed anything. And I just want to still again thank Hadia for being here as our expert. Okay?
Yes, thank you so much.
Honey, this would not have gone as smoothly as it did tonight without you being here.
Right.
Thank you so much for that. And again, if you all want to reach out to her, you can reach out to her on her Facebook, Jenna Holistic Health. And I believe that's also on Instagram. Is that on Instagram?
Yes, same as on Instagram as well.
Okay, so those are some resources. And again, there are other resources in our community here in Atlanta. You definitely should can reach out. And then, of course, for those who are in extreme crisis, do not be afraid to call the 1-800-crisis line at any time if you find yourself in a situation where you just need some immediate assistance and you really don't want to talk to anyone that you know. Sometimes the crisis center will walk you through that. And so as we're going out, I wanted to also, I have a friend of mine who is actually writing a book or doing some programming around trauma. Basically, it's like women who have felt themselves being left, them and their children. She's actually wanting to get some responses from people. So if you're interested in helping her with that survey, as well as being in the book, some of the book, she will either identify you if you want to be identified, but you can also be anonymous. But she's looking for some responses for women who have actually gone through a trauma of being left behind, because of course she's writing the book in order to help other women to see the signs and the flags that they basically experience in order to make sure that things change. But if you're interested in that, you can reach out to Rock the Crown directly, and then I will pass your information on to her. But again, thank you so much, Crown Nation, for going over the time with us. Because look, at first I was like, "Ooh, this needs to be 2 hours," and I was like, "Wait." Nafisa's like, "No, this don't need to be no 2 hours." I could just hear her in my head. I was like, "Keep it simple, Naima, keep it simple." And I was just like, "No, we go 2 hours, we all gonna be like, and when I was little." It's like, no, we're not doing that. We're just gonna give the people a little bit, and then they can get a lot on their own. So
Right.
But thank you so much again, Crown Nation. We all will see you next week. And my brain is so on 10. I don't know what next week is, but we hope that you will join us next week at 7 p.m. Inshallah.
Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum, everybody.
Peace.